The envelope appeared beside my plate without a word. It was Friday evening, November 12th, and I was halfway through dinner in a small family restaurant in Portland when a waiter stopped, set down a thin yellow envelope, and walked away as if nothing unusual had happened. My name was written on it in black ink. Mary Walker. Personal. I opened it with the careless curiosity reserved for receipts and coupons. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A legal document. My eyes went straight to the number. $480,000. Then to the date. November 10th. Then to the signature at the bottom. My son's. The room seemed to pull away from me. My hands began to shake so hard I had to grip the table. I couldn't breathe, not fully. Not enough. Someone had signed away my home. And my son had done it for them. I did not yet know how. I did not yet know why. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This was not a mistake. How could he do this to me? If you want, we can continue with the next part and you can tell me what to change before we move on. My name is Mary Walker. I am 67 years old. I have lived my life as if someone were quietly keeping score behind me, marking whether I endured, whether I finished what I started, whether I stood on my own feet. I worked for decades as a teacher, the kind who arrived before the hallways filled and stayed after the last child left, because there was always one student who needed a few more minutes of calm and patience. I worked the land as well, not out of romance but necessity. The earth does not care how tired you are. It only responds to hands that show up. And I was a mother, with all the invisible labor that never makes it into photographs but holds a family together. When my husband died, I did not lean on anyone. I rebuilt our home the way you mend a fence after a storm, slowly, plank by plank, bill by bill. I knew the value of everything I owned, not just in dollars but in hours of my life. I paid every tax. I missed no payment. I never asked for help, because over the years I had learned something simple and hard. When you rely only on yourself, you are harder to control. Brian, my son, used to be my pride. As a boy, he noticed things. If I was tired, he would bring me water without being asked. His laughter filled rooms. I believed I had raised a good man. Then he married Kate. I will not say she changed him, that would be too easy. He made his own choices. But with her beside him, those choices became easier to justify. Kate entered our lives quietly but confidently. She used the right words, smiled at the right times, and called me Mom, as if testing how the word fit her mouth. First, I was grateful. I thought my son had found someone who truly wanted to belong. It took me time to understand that effort does not always mean affection. Sometimes it means calculation. They began visiting more often. Not because they missed me. I felt the difference in small ways. How quickly conversations drifted from my health to paperwork, from weather to long-term plans. My home slowly stopped being a home to them. It became an asset. A number. I saw the way Kate looked at the rooms, not like a guest, but like someone already arranging furniture in her head. The first crack was barely audible. One afternoon at the kitchen table, Brian said casually, almost kindly, "Mom, you're going to sell this place someday anyway." He said this place, not your home. And someday in a way that suggested the timing was flexible, if pushed correctly. I pretended not to hear. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove. Women my age are skilled at placing pain in drawers so life can continue. But something tightened in my chest. Not fear. Recognition. After that, Kate began helping with my banking. She offered gently, sweetly. "It's easier if I organize everything." She asked for passwords. Took documents for a moment. Photographed papers just in case. And whenever I hesitated, she sighed as if I were the one creating difficulty. I started noticing their looks. Quick glances exchanged when they thought I was focused on my tea instead of them. And each time, a knot formed in my chest that neither sleep nor routine could undo. Why were they in such a hurry? I didn't yet know the answer. But I already felt it coming. The first real warning did not arrive with shouting or threats. It came wrapped in politeness, which made it harder to name and easier to dismiss. Brian began finishing my sentences for me when other people were around. Not often. Just enough to feel accidental. If I mentioned a bill, he would gently correct the amount. If I talked about an appointment, Kate would smile and say, "That's not quite what you told us last time, remember?" They said it lightly, like concerned children indulging an elderly parent. I laughed along because laughing felt safer than objecting. Then came the comments. You've been tired lately. You already asked that. Are you sure you paid this? Each remark landed softly, but together they formed a pattern. I began to question myself. I started writing things down more carefully, checking calendars twice, rereading statements at night under the kitchen light. I told myself it was sensible at my age. But there was something else underneath it, unease. A sense that the ground was shifting while I was being encouraged not to notice. One afternoon, Kate accompanied me to a routine doctor's visit. I hadn't asked her to come. She insisted. In the waiting room, she filled out forms quickly, confidently, her handwriting sharp and controlled. When the nurse called my name, Kate stood up too, as if it were understood she would come along. I didn't stop her. I didn't want to seem difficult. During the appointment, while I was distracted with blood pressure cuffs and polite questions, Kate spoke directly to the doctor. She's been forgetting things, she said calmly. Little details. We're just starting to worry. I turned to look at her, startled. She didn't meet my eyes. The doctor nodded slowly, thoughtfully, the way professionals do when new information slides into place. I felt something close over around me, like a door being gently shut. I wanted to say no. I wanted to explain. But the moment passed, sealed by clinical language and moving on to the next question. When we left, Kate squeezed my arm affectionately. It's nothing, she said. Just being proactive. From then on, decisions stopped feeling like mine. They were discussed around me, not with me. Brian talked about simplifying things. Kate suggested consolidating accounts, for clarity. They praised me when I agreed and looked faintly disappointed when I didn't. Once at a family gathering, Brian joked, "Mom's been mixing numbers again." People laughed kindly. I smiled because correcting him would have made the room uncomfortable. But something inside me went very still. At night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, the familiar creaks and sighs of wood and pipes I had known for years. I told myself I was imagining things. That children worry. That time changes roles. But there was a question I could not silence. When did I become someone who needed managing? The answer frightened me because it was not about age. It was about intention. And by then, I could already feel how carefully, how patiently, they were moving me toward a place where my voice would matter less than their plans. The humiliations did not arrive all at once. They were rationed carefully, like medicine given in small doses so the body would not reject it. Brian and Kate never raised their voices. They never threatened. They corrected. They suggested. They explained things to me slowly, patiently, as if I were the one changing and they were simply adapting. "You're forgetting things," Brian said one afternoon while standing in my kitchen, his tone almost apologetic. "It's normal, Mom. Everyone does at your age." I knew I hadn't forgotten. I remembered the bill. I remembered the date. I remembered exactly what I had said. But the certainty stayed trapped inside me, pressed down by the calm authority in his voice. I nodded because arguing would have made me look defensive. Defensive people appear guilty even when they are not. Kate joined in seamlessly. "You mixed up the numbers again," she said another time, tapping her phone screen as if the proof lived there. "It's okay. We'll double-check everything from now on." From now on. The phrase settled into the air like a verdict. They began correcting me in front of others. Friends. Distant relatives. Even neighbors who had known me for years. If I told a story, Brian would gently interrupt to clarify. If I mentioned a plan, Kate would smile and say, "We already talked about that, remember?" People laughed kindly, indulgently. No one questioned them. Why would they? A son and his wife helping an aging mother is a comforting story. It reassures everyone in the room. Once Kate spoke to my doctor without asking me. I found out later, when the doctor mentioned what your daughter-in-law told me. She had described memory problems, confusion, emotional sensitivity, all in a voice so calm and concerned that it sounded official. I sat there listening, my hands folded in my lap, feeling myself shrink into the chair. When did I become a burden? The question came to me late at night, when the house was quiet and I could hear the refrigerator hum and the clock ticking in the hallway. These sounds had once been comforting. Now they felt like witnesses. I replayed conversations in my head. searching for the moment I had lost control. I could not find it. That frightened me more than anything else. They stopped asking my opinion. They informed me instead. They decided what was best. They spoke about my life as if it were a project with deadlines and objectives. When I hesitated, they exchanged looks, the same looks I had noticed before, then turned back to me with practiced patience. "Trust us," Kate said once, resting her hand lightly on my shoulder. "We're just trying to make things easier for you." Easier for whom? I did not ask the question out loud, but it grew heavier each day, pressing against my chest, reminding me that respect can be taken quietly, one small correction at a time, until you no longer recognize the sound of your own authority disappearing. The real blow did not come with shouting or panic. It arrived the way truly devastating things often do, quietly, methodically, dressed as something already finished. I understood that only later. At first, all I knew was that the yellow envelope had followed me home like a shadow, and now it lay open on my kitchen table, its contents spread out as if they had every right to be there. It was a property sale contract. I read it once without comprehension, the way you read words in a foreign language. Then I read it again, slower, forcing myself not to rush past the parts that made my stomach turn. The buyer was a company I had never heard of, a name so generic it felt deliberately hollow. The amount was just under $500,000. The notary stamp looked official, neat, unquestionable. And the filing date stopped me cold. It had been filed while I was in the hospital. The memory returned with brutal clarity. The narrow bed. The pale curtains that never quite blocked the light. The sound of carts rolling down the hallway at night. I remembered Kate sitting beside me, telling me not to worry about paperwork, not to tire myself with details. I remembered Brian standing near the window, hands in his pockets, assuring me that everything at home was handled. His signature stared back at me now. Steady, confident, familiar. The same signature I had seen on birthday cards, school forms, and loan documents I had once co-signed without hesitation. There was nothing forged about it. That realization hurt more than any denial could have. They had sold my home, not discussed it, not suggested it, not prepared me for it. They had sold it as if it already belonged to them. When I confronted them, I expected something: shock, guilt, fear. I received none of it. Kate's face tightened, not with shame but annoyance. Brian avoided my eyes, as though the floor held answers he preferred. "You weren't thinking clearly at the time," Kate said, her voice cool, rehearsed. "We did what was necessary." Brian nodded slightly, as if agreement required no words. "It was the best solution, Mom. You couldn't manage anymore. We saved you from making a bad decision." Saved me. The word echoed in my head long after they stopped speaking. Saved me from my own home. From the walls I had painted. From the land I had worked. From the place where my husband had lived and died. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I felt something far more frightening happen inside me. I broke inward silently, the way ice splits under pressure without a sound. In that moment, I understood that this had never been about concern or age or confusion. It had been about opportunity. They had waited until I was tired, until doubt had been planted carefully by careful hands, until their version of events sounded reasonable to everyone but me. And the truth settled heavily in my chest, undeniable and sharp. My son had not been manipulated. He had chosen this. That night, after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The tea beside me had gone cold, untouched. I wrapped my hands around the mug anyway, needing the weight of something real. On paper, my home was no longer mine. But my mind was clear. Clear enough to know that this betrayal would not be the final word. That night, after the house finally went quiet, I did not turn on the television. I did not call a friend. I did not distract myself the way I had learned to do after years of swallowing discomfort. I sat alone at the kitchen table with a single lamp on, the rest of the house wrapped in shadow, and let the silence settle fully around me. The tea beside me had gone cold. A thin skin had formed on the surface, and I watched it tremble slightly each time the old refrigerator clicked on. I did not replace it. I wanted to feel the cold. I wanted to feel everything I had avoided feeling for far too long. I looked around my kitchen as if I were seeing it for the first time. The worn edge of the counter where I had stood every morning for decades. The small crack in the tile near the sink that my husband once promised to fix and never did. The drawer that stuck unless you lifted it slightly. These were not just objects. They were proof of a life lived deliberately, patiently, honestly. And someone had decided that life no longer belonged to me. For the first time since the envelope appeared on my table, I allowed myself to remember my husband's voice clearly, without softening it with nostalgia. He had not been a sentimental man. He believed in preparation, in paperwork, in knowing where things were kept and why. Never stay silent when you're betrayed, he used to say. Silence is how people rewrite your story. I stood up slowly and walked to the hallway closet where I kept an old metal document box. It was heavy, dented at one corner, and far less elegant than the folders Kate preferred. Inside were deeds, letters, insurance policies, and handwritten notes I had not looked at in years. My real life reduced to paper. I lit a small candle on the table, not for ceremony but for focus. The flame was steady, unafraid. I liked that. As I opened the box, something inside me shifted. The fear that had been sitting in my chest since the restaurant loosened its grip. In its place came clarity. Cold. Sharp. Honest. I was not confused. I was not helpless. I was not finished. They had mistaken my restraint for weakness, my politeness for permission, my silence for surrender. I closed the box and sat back down, my hands finally steady. Enough. The word did not come with anger. Came with certainty. They believed the story was already written, but I understood something they had forgotten. I was still here, and I was still capable. I woke before dawn, the way I used to when the farm still required me to be outside before the day had fully made up its mind. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt like a witness. Felt like a responsibility. I stood at the sink and washed my face with cold water, letting the shock of it steady me. Then I made coffee strong enough to leave a bitter edge on my tongue, because sweetness was not what I needed that morning. I needed precision. I cleared my kitchen table the way I once cleared a desk before grading final exams. No clutter, no distractions, only what mattered. I laid out the contract from the envelope, the hospital discharge papers that proved where I had been, and the bank statements Kate had insisted on organizing. The candle from the night before had burned down to a stub. I didn't relight it. I didn't want ceremony. I wanted daylight. At 8:03 a.m., I called an attorney whose name I had been given years earlier by a neighbor after a bad boundary dispute. I had saved the number out of habit, never imagining I would need it for my own son. His receptionist asked for my name, and when I said it, there was a pause, just long enough to tell me they understood this was not a casual matter. I was given an appointment that same day. I put on my coat, gathered the document box, and drove myself. I did not want anyone else holding the steering wheel of my life. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. He listened without interrupting, flipping through the contract with a stillness that made my own breathing slow. When he finally looked up, his voice was firm, almost gentle. "This can be challenged," he said. "But we will need a clean trail. We will need evidence. We will need to move quickly." "Tell me what to do," I said. So I did it. I gathered everything. Old deeds, tax records, insurance letters, the original purchase documents from years ago. I made copies until the machine whirred hot and the stack beside me looked like a small, undeniable wall. I photographed every page on my phone as well, because paper can disappear and devices can be backed up. I wrote down dates and times, not trusting memory alone. I noted the names of hospital staff who could confirm my condition. I requested my medical records in full. Then I went to the bank. I did not ask to review things. I didn't explain myself the way women are trained to do, apologizing for taking up space. I spoke clearly and asked for a manager. I placed the papers on the desk and said, "I need to remove all third-party access. Immediately." The manager blinked, surprised at my certainty. I repeated it slower. Immediately. Within the hour, I froze accounts that could be frozen, canceled authorizations Kate had slipped her way into, and changed every password. I set up fraud alerts. I required in-person verification for large transfers. I opened a new account in my name alone and moved what I legally could move. I did not do it out of spite. I did it because control is a door and I was closing it. By afternoon I had filed formal complaints, one with the county recorder, one with the notary commission, one with the bank's fraud department. My lawyer drafted letters that were not emotional, not personal but sharp as clean metal. The language was simple. This transaction is disputed. This signature is unauthorized. This will be pursued. When Brian called, I let it ring. When Kate texted, I saved it. Every contact became part of the record. That evening, they showed up at my house unannounced. Brian stood on the porch with his hands shoved into his pockets, looking like a man bracing for bad weather. Kate wore her pleasant face, the one she used when she wanted control to look like kindness. "We just want to talk," she said. I opened the door, but I did not step back. "I've already talked," I said calmly. "To an attorney. To the bank. To the county." Brian's eyes widened. Kate's smile tightened like fabric pulled too far. "You can't do this," Brian said, and the child in him flashed briefly, the one who believed consequences could be negotiated away. "I can," I said. "And I am." Kate's voice turned cold. "You're overreacting." I looked at her steadily. "You don't own me anymore." The words did not shake. They landed exactly where I intended. And as I closed the door, I understood something with quiet satisfaction. The hardest part was not filing papers or making calls. The hardest part was remembering that my voice still counted. The next weeks moved like winter weather, slow, gray, and relentless. Nothing happened all at once, and that was almost the hardest part. People imagine justice as a single dramatic moment, a gavel striking, a guilty face collapsing. In real life, justice is paperwork, waiting rooms, certified letters, and phone calls that end with, "We'll get back to you." My attorney filed an emergency notice to challenge the transfer and stop any further action on the property. The county recorder's office became a place I visited more than the grocery store. I learned the names of clerks. I learned which forms needed an original signature and which could be emailed. I learned that a woman with calm persistence is more frightening to dishonest people than a woman who screams. Brian and Kate tried to regain control the only way they knew how, by shaping the story before anyone else could. A neighbor told me Kate was worried about my memory. A distant cousin called to ask gently if I was doing all right these days. Someone had been talking. So I did something I should have done earlier. I documented my clarity. My attorney arranged for an independent evaluation. No family involved, no whispering in hallways. The doctor asked questions, tested memory, made me draw a clock, recall words, solve simple problems. I answered steadily, not to prove anything to him, but to put a wall between my reality and their narrative. When the report came back, it said what I already knew: I was competent, clear, capable. That single piece of paper changed the temperature of everything. Then the investigation widened. The notary's records were requested. The shell company was traced to a mailbox address, and an LLC structure designed to hide the real buyer. Bank activity was reviewed. The timeline sharpened. The hospital admission dates did not match the notarization. The signature authority did not match the legal requirements for a sale in my name. Every time a new fact surfaced, I felt two things at once: grief and relief. Grief because each detail confirmed what my heart had resisted admitting. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Relief because plans leave trails. Brian showed up twice without calling. The first time, he stood at the edge of my porch like a man hoping the past would step outside and forgive him. He tried to speak softly, as if softness could erase what he had done. "Mom, it's gotten out of hand," he said. "We can fix this privately." Privately meant quietly. Quietly meant safely for him. "I am fixing it," I told him. "With witnesses." The second time, Kate came alone. Her face was composed, but her eyes were sharp with calculation. She offered me something she thought I would accept. A deal. "We'll put it back," she said, "if you drop everything else." I looked at her and realized she still believed the worst thing in the world was embarrassment. She could not understand that the worst thing had already happened. My son had tried to erase me. "No," I said. "You don't get to bargain with what you stole." 3 months after the envelope, the hearing finally came. It wasn't theatrical. It was fluorescent lighting, stiff chairs, and a judge who looked tired of human greed. My attorney spoke for me, but I sat upright where everyone could see me. Brian avoided my eyes. Kate watched me like she was trying to predict my next move. The judge reviewed the findings: inconsistencies, improper notarization, questions of authority, evidence of deception. When the decision was spoken, it sounded almost simple. The sale was declared fraudulent. The contract was voided. The property was restored to me. I did not feel triumph. I felt my body exhale, as if it had been holding its breath for months. The consequences followed in waves. The notary's license was suspended and then revoked. Complaints reached Kate's employer. The helpful story she told about my confusion did not sound so noble when paired with attempted fraud. She lost her job. Brian faced criminal charges. Not the kind that end neatly in a story, but the kind that stain a person's future. Court dates. Probation discussions. Lawyers speaking in low voices about outcomes and reputations. People asked me if I was satisfied. Satisfied is not the word. I was restored. My home was mine again on paper, yes. But more importantly, my name was mine again. My voice had been heard in a room that mattered. And the strangest thing was this. Once the truth was spoken aloud in official language, I stopped feeling like I needed to explain myself to anyone. I had done what I had to do. I had chosen myself. Life did not suddenly become quiet after everything was resolved. It became different. The house sounded the same ticking clock, the same low hum of appliances, but my body moved through it with a steadiness I had not felt in years. I woke without dread. I drank my coffee without rehearsing explanations in my head. I stopped bracing myself for footsteps that might demand something from me. The land was still mine. That knowledge settled slowly, like warmth returning to fingers after cold. I leased part of it to a neighboring farmer, a practical arrangement that brought in modest income and relieved me of work my joints no longer enjoyed. The rest I kept as it was. I walked the boundaries some mornings not to check for threats, but to remind myself that I belonged here without justification. I began traveling in small ways. Nothing dramatic. A few days by the coast. A train ride to see an old friend I had postponed for years. I packed lightly and returned when I wanted. No one questioned my plans. No one managed my schedule. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. The room smelled of acrylics and coffee, and everyone was a beginner at something. My hands were clumsy at first, but I liked the discipline of learning again without needing approval. I painted landscapes I recognized and others I invented. None of them needed to be useful. On Thursdays I met friends for coffee. Real conversations. Not updates. Not explanations. We talked about books, weather, small aches, small joys. Sometimes we sat quietly. Silence no longer felt like something to be filled. My home felt different too. Lighter. As if the walls themselves had released a tension they had been holding on my behalf. I rearranged furniture not because someone suggested it, but because I wanted the chair closer to the window. I threw away papers I no longer needed. I kept others simply because they were mine. People asked about Brian and Kate. I answered briefly, truthfully, without heat. Distance had replaced anger, and it was a cleaner thing to carry. I no longer tried to understand them. Understanding is not always required for peace. At night I slept deeply. When I dreamed of open fields and unfinished roads, not locked doors. I woke with my hands relaxed. My life did not become smaller after the betrayal. It became mine again. There was a time when I asked myself the same question over and over, usually late at night when the house was quiet and doubt spoke louder than reason. How could they do this to me? I turned it around in my mind, searching for mistakes I might have made, signs I should have noticed earlier, moments when I could have acted differently. For a long while, I believed the answer must be complicated. That it had something to do with age, with family dynamics, with misunderstandings layered on top of love. Now I know better. They did it because they believed I would stay silent. They believed I would choose peace over truth, politeness over dignity, motherhood over self-respect. They counted on the habits I had spent a lifetime perfecting: endurance, patience, forgiveness. They mistook those qualities for permission. What they did not understand is that silence is not the same as weakness. It is a choice. And like any choice, it can be withdrawn. I did not fight back to punish them. I did not fight to teach a lesson or to feel victorious. I fought because there comes a moment when continuing to endure becomes a form of self-betrayal. And I had already given enough of myself away. Choosing myself did not make me harder. It made me clearer. I still believe in love. I still believe in family. But I no longer believe that either of those should require erasing yourself to keep them intact. If something can only survive when you are quiet, diminished, and afraid, then it does not deserve your loyalty. My voice did not return all at once. Came back the way strength often does, slowly, steadily, with use. Each decision I made for myself restored a piece of it. Each boundary held made it stronger. I am not angry anymore. Anger burns out. What remains is steadier and far more useful. I am here. I am heard. And I belong to myself. If my story resonates with you, sit with it for a moment. Ask yourself where you have stayed silent out of habit rather than choice. And remember this, no matter how late it feels, it is never too late to speak.